Train by day, Kyle Wigginton podcast by night, all day.
Conor Leahy. Is that right?
That's my name.
That's your name? Okay. I always mess them up. I'm horrible at this.
Yeah. The only other place I've heard the last name Leahy, there's a Patrick Leahy who's the senator from Vermont, and of course Mr. Leahy.
Mr. Leahy, yeah.
The Reverend from Trailer Park Boys.
Yeah, that's who I know. That's all I thought about right there. So is he like your dad?
Yeah, actually, yeah. Not the guy who played him, but the character himself. Yeah.
It was written about your dad.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I don't know how you turned out this way then.
Yeah, no. My father is a gay alcoholic who runs a trailer park. Yeah, it's pretty wild. That's not true. My father's a pretty reserved fella from the East Coast.
Very nice gentleman.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you're not from New Orleans, right?
No. So I grew up in Santa Clarita, which people might know from the Santa Clarita Diet, which is a Netflix show.
Yeah, they eat people out there, right?
Yeah, they do. They do. They might as well. It's a big suburb. It's the biggest suburb north of Los Angeles. And basically it's become a kind of like an upper middle class enclave, as all the people who want to work in Los Angeles don't want to live in the city. Yeah. I mean, that's just how suburbs happen, right? And so everyone moved out there and it just got bigger and bigger. And my parents moved there to, raise my brother and sister and me before I was born. And yeah, I grew up there. I had a pretty good education. It's a pretty good school system out there. And then I went to a place called Academy of the Canyons, which is like there's programs like it all over the country, but like I was able to take community college classes for free at the same time as high school classes. And they just like counted as both. It was on a community college campus.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. It was a really cool experience. And I got about a year of college done back then.
In high school.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I transferred to Sac State where I studied history. And then I just fell in love with the city, mostly the people there. And, it's a smaller town. It's not like it's more walkable than Los Angeles, which is not at all. And, a smaller town feel, nicer people. So I stayed.
Oh, yeah. Always. Yeah, I noticed that. Being from Arkansas, very small town of Arkansas, everybody knows everybody.
Yeah.
I think it's probably one of the reasons that they're nice, because they know where they live. I know where you fucking live.
Yeah.
Now, so like I'm a huge fan of cannibalism. No, I'm just kidding. Wait, so you studied history. I
studied history.
Did you find any? So I'm a huge fan of history because I find that it's written by the victors, right? So the quote. Okay, so do you think history that we know? Well, first of all, I don't really know what history you know.
Okay,
isn't that crazy?
Yes. Yeah. No. Definitely.
Yeah.
So I did have just a general history background. I probably should have done more of a focus, but I have no special expertise. I just took all the most interesting history classes to me.
What was your favorite?
My favorite, one of the most interesting ones was, that wasn't a history class. The Russian history class was really interesting. I had a really interesting Chinese history course. And then
why was Russian history so fascinating? I don't really know anything about Russia.
Yeah, well, the Russian state is so its background, and people might know this simply from Putin's his declaration of war. But the history of the Rus, the Russian people, goes back to the Kievan Rus forming a civilization, which is like the central city in Ukraine now is Kiev. And that empire of basically peasant farmers and towns, spread into the east. Towards the edges of Siberia. And then for a couple hundred years, the Golden Horde, which was there are several hordes throughout history, but the Golden Horde was the big horde that would end up ransacking Rome and was ruled by the Khans.
The Golden Horde is the Russian army?
It's a Mongolian army.
Okay.
So, I mean, just a giant army of people that are excellent hunters and nomads, and they would just roll over these small armies that were designed to garrison and fight off invaders, but they would just roll through just insane military technology of just perfect compound bows and experience built from just running around the steppe on horses that they bred for battle and hunting. And so just you're an expert marksman on the back of a horse since you're a teenager, then you run through. And so what they would do is they would run ransack over these big European areas, and they wouldn't stay there. So commonly Alexander the Great, he would have a big enough army that he could kill half the men, have his men set up in there with their wives. And by 10 years later, the people that he like walked over that area with were now living there. And then those were his like states that he ruled over. But the horde, they would just be like, okay, we have defeated you. We're going to leave, but you need to give us this, and this for tributary every couple months, or we're going to come back and do it again. And so that's how the Golden Horde increased its wealth so much. And of course, the last empire in China was actually, God, I can't remember the name of the empire, but they just they came around the wall and took over the entirety of China. And the last dynasty in China were actually started as Mongolian invaders.
See, that's what fascinates me about history. It's not really the wars and things. It's the ancient structures. And that's what I find fascinating. I love seeing things like the wall, the Great Wall of China. Like it's incredible to me that someone built this. You know, it's miles and miles and miles long. The pyramids, I mean, it's a easy one right there. And the fact these things are all over the planet.
Yeah. I mean, people are very ingenuitive, and like they learn to do things that are like hard to replicate because they exist in tandem with the technology and like ability to process what we're doing at the time. So like it's the same with like how coding works now. Basically, there's a paradigm of how you build things with the tools that you have. And, you know, people who are the innovators that we think of now today, they came along and they're like, I'm going to build a new system that lets me do something different with the ones and zeros from the beginning. They build a new set of tools. And that's how you see all of these things that are slightly similar but different. Like the pyramids on South America looked like the ones in Egypt, but they weren't built the same and they do look a bit different. And then like things like Roman structures, the reason they figured out the reason Roman concrete is like they're unable to recreate how they worked with it was because they only grabbed like minerals from one specific deposit at the bottom of a volcano. And they realized that the carbon content in that mineral soot is what makes the concrete so hard, which is why there's still Roman baths standing from like thousands of years ago.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's still perfect structure too. It's crazy. So they grabbed it from different locations.
There was like one set of like volcanic regions, probably closer to the Pompeii area, that they would like extract. I mean, don't quote me on that. I'm forgetting exactly where that is.
Well, no, yeah, it's fascinating. This stuff is. Well, the reason. So last night we were talking about the homelessness situation.
Yes.
So this is what you study now, right?
Yes. So after I got into grad school about 2 years ago, I'm going to the Masters of Public Policy and Administration program at Sacramento State. And they just asked us to pick a general focus. And, you know, this is what I wanted to work in. This is what I wanted to do. And I have friends who experienced homelessness around me as they grew up. There's a few times that I got a little close. And yeah, I started writing all about that. And then I got a job at an agency for the state of California that works on that. So it's still, I study and write about housing policy in my free time, but like all my work is related. So, you know, I'm a pretty junior to it as an expert, but I have quite a bit of expertise in it. And
no, we were talking about last night. It was fascinating. Like you have a lot of knowledge about this. And I think it's, that's why I wanted to have you on the podcast today, because it's a real problem in this country right now. And it's something that I feel like we could do more to help. So it's one thing. I think the thing we should start with that a lot of people might not know. Hang on, we got a siren going by. This is the problem when you have a podcast on a busy street. Something's on fire, huh?
Maybe they're just going to help someone out.
Hopefully, yeah. So what were we talking about?
Okay.
Yeah.
So the welfare systems in the United States that most people end up interacting with, you fill out a form, you tell them who you are and how much money you can need, and you get a third of that, and it kind of helps you sometimes. And that's usually run through like a county welfare office. It's funded in part by state, local, and federal taxes that are mixed into these different funding methods that end up with someone providing a service and another person working at a desk making sure you deserve it. The system that does that for homelessness, people experiencing homelessness and need help, or people who are about to experience homelessness, it's run in a tandem with like this tradition of nonprofits and private entities like churches providing these services. Pardon me. And so in 95, Clinton wrote something called the COC system. So continuums of care, and they exist all throughout the United States. And some of them are very formalized, and some of them are a ragtag bunch of people who are just kind of meet through the community. And funding through the federal level and state level is often distributed to COCs along with county and city governments. And the COCs are essentially councils made up of people who are running the homelessness response system in the area. So nonprofits, maybe sometimes faith leaders, oftentimes like county and city workers who are officials who are running the homelessness response system. But it's different place to place. So when you think about like administration and like building things out, already America is a very complex area in that regard. But the homelessness response system, it changes like place to place.
No, it's a nightmare. You can't do that.
Yeah. It's very hard to figure out big long-term solutions, because if you build a really well thought out program, it's going to be expensive to administer because the system they're administering to is already super complex.
Right. You kind of have to, it's hard to track that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you're probably just throwing money to the wind in some situations.
Yeah, no, very much so.
Yeah. I think that a lot about churches and things like that. The nonprofits is that people do that a lot of times just save money. They don't want to pay taxes.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like, it comes from a noble place and a tradition that is in some places noble, but like,
I would love to think that humans are all noble nowadays, but I've been in this world for a few years.
I mean, you try and for the most part, people, I think it's important to just be like, people have what they want to do. And like, obviously, like people are incentivized, but that by their desires and the way they view the world. And so like, when it comes to like running policy or administering services, like you just have to think of that from that perspective. Like an area that is more conservative will focus way less on homelessness prevention. They want to do shelter first, which is the state of New York system. And people who are experiencing homelessness must be sheltered. And it's very common in the states to get colder during the winter months because people will just die in droves. Yeah. In places like California's position is housing first, which leads to its own unique problems, being that you have to, the rule is that you need to find people a house to live in. So
that's the difference between house and shelter. Yeah. Shelter is just a big place with a bunch of beds. Okay. And housing is actually getting someone in a place.
Yes. Permanently rehousing someone or providing them permanent supportive housing.
Yeah. You were saying something last night. You were talking about how the levels of the systems, like when you build more houses, what were you talking about that?
Yeah. So the biggest thing to understand, the reason people experience homelessness and the reason the homelessness crisis is what it is housing is too expensive. So the housing market and housing policies are completely interrelated with anything you think about homelessness. Obviously, the names are similar, but I'm not sure how often people can completely consider when you walk by an empty house, you think, oh, that should be full. But it's like the system we have influences people to see a house as an asset. And so, but it's the only asset you can own that, like, whatever you do with it, if you don't have someone living there, you're depriving someone of a space to live. So if you own a plot of land and it's empty, then that's not exactly depriving someone of a space to live, but it is 2 or 3 steps removed from like turning it into a place where someone could live and then putting someone living there.
Right.
So it's different everywhere slightly, but for the most part, generally speaking, like a broad view, California and a lot of the United States, there's just not enough housing where people live. And so they end up being pushed out because it's a market system and it drives up the price, and everyone's poor in America because this is kind of a joke of a country.
Yeah.
And so,
it's getting worse too, man. It's sad right now. We saw a lot of the stuff that happened this past year was these large corporations, with the flux of the dollar and the ETH and stuff coming in, the crypto, they were trying to buy assets. So they were buying all these houses, but they weren't actually dealing with them. They were just buying them for an asset.
Yeah.
So then you have these empty houses that then, people either can't afford the rent on, or they just don't have anywhere to go. Yeah. So is this what you work on? You're trying to change that policy? I
mean, I do research on what land use policies affect housing prices. And essentially the opinions that seem to matter the most and land use policies that affect it the most are interrelated to like public opinion. And we know this, The Atlantic had a great article about this called actually public participation is not good for democracy. And it was basically just describing how the housing crisis can be directly related to people putting a lot of their money. And most people in America own their homes. Most people our age don't, but most people in America own their homes. And so a little over a third of the country are renters. And so people who are homeowners are the people with the power. That's just how it works. And so it's complex, but eventually that filters into public opinion, pushing policies that don't allow for the building of way more housing, which will drive down the price of people's homes, which is an asset they own. And everyone's poor in America. It's really hard to retire. You don't want to see your biggest asset decrease in value.
Right.
And it's like, I mean, this is one of those things where it's like you look at someone arguing for less housing or not to build it in their neighborhood or not in my backyard, NIMBYism, as they call it.
That was what I found fascinating last night. You were talking about how whenever they build more houses, it decreases the property value. So the people that own the houses, when they go to these public meetings, they don't want more houses built because they want to keep their property value high.
Yeah.
So then it's holding down the people who our heads are underwater already. Right?
Yeah, that's how you get in America. You put your boot on the person lower than you.
Yeah, and it's sad, man. Hate this shit.
Yeah, but I mean that like all of this stuff, and this is what I was getting at earlier. It's all interrelated to understandable incentives based on the way people live their life. Like if the economy was run different, people wouldn't feel the need to do this.
Right. Yeah.
And then we could build more housing. Or if housing wasn't left completely to the market like every other asset, we wouldn't have to do it that way. And it's a problem we could solve. It's just a problem of planning, like administration and planning that. Like there's planners everywhere, city planning elements like that. You can do it. It's totally possible. It's not unreasonable. And, you know, when you think about it in the way the system works, it's more expensive to let people become homeless because those are people from an economics perspective who could be contributing to the tax base if they were able to hold down a job and live at home. And also just like there's a general plus benefit from an economics perspective to like letting people like experience joy and build assets and spend money around places. Like it's just better for the economy and human beings, which is obviously the more important element here. To just not let them become homeless.
Yeah, no, I find that a lot of humans, they're a product of their environment. So it's definitely the environment that we have here in this country that's creating that problem because it's making everyone want to like grab and hold rather than grab someone and lift them up. Like we're all trying to take what we can to survive, right? Rather than just trying to like help your fellow man survive, which is going to erase the entirety of the country.
Yeah. So, I mean, like most people would agree that the modern market economies run off of an enforced scarcity. Now, like things are going to be scarce places because you can't have everything everywhere. So like if something is in short supply in a certain place, like it does have to be pricier. Like if you think about avocado throughout the country, it's pretty cheap in California because it grows everywhere and you can get it there fresh year round. It's going to be more expensive throughout the country because you have to ship it there and it goes bad quickly. But for the most part, like the most basic needs of human beings are enforcedly scarce at this point. Like we could just build more housing. The state could just step in, hire contractors and get it done. And then they could not charge people to live there. And then anytime you hear someone complain about someone experiencing homelessness, sleeping on the street, or just saying like something that resembles a slur about that type of person, like that person is experiencing discomfort and they're expressing it in a gross way that's thoughtless to other humans. But they wouldn't have to have that opinion or that thought process. They wouldn't have to feel that way if the state just didn't let people live on the street.
Right. Yeah, I don't understand why people. We were at Skid Row this past time I was in LA, and it hurts my heart to be down there, and I can't understand why other people. It doesn't hurt their heart the same way, and like want them to change. Like that thought process doesn't work for me. So if like there's someone out there that does work on this stuff, like you guys, like I think this is a good thing you're doing.
Yeah, no, I mean, I love what I do. I love what I get to do. I won't speak too much because I'm not representing like the state of California or the agency I work for in any way. But I will say I work with some really hard working, really interesting and creative people. And we're being asked to do a lot of new and exciting things in regards to like ending homelessness. But I mean, it's really easily said, like the way to solve this crisis is to just build housing and help people get into it. And the state could do that. But in many ways, the systems we have set up prevent us from doing that. So there's a term that a political science professor has come up with to describe the American systems, like the federalized system, which is a kludgeocracy. And it's basically the system exists in bits and pieces to kind of distribute power to people throughout and like locally. to the most that level. But there's also an oversight power provided by the federal government. And so all these systems clash and interact with each other. And voting is so complicated and so disparate that people end up getting one voter could help create a system that is countering to each other's needs at the top and bottom level. And then systems are set up to try and solve loops and problems in that situation. And what you end up with is this incredibly complex Rube Goldberg-esque system.
Just making it more complicated. Yeah.
It's a problem and it becomes more expensive to run it. And so like for instance, I say, just build more housing. Well, technically, like from the California perspective, technically cities and counties have complete control over their land area. So the state has set up a system where they can try and plan for the amount of housing they think they'll need of all income levels. And you need to build of all income levels, because if you only build it for one, only that income level is going to buy the housing. And it's called the Regional Housing Needs Assessment, or the RHNA process. And it was a way to help cities and counties plan. Well, cities and counties didn't use it. And they tongue-in-cheekly said, we're kind of trying, it's not easy. And now the state has adopted a new policy where they're going to sue cities and counties that don't follow the RHNA process and don't build for the housing that the state has said, hey, we figured out how many people are going to live here and how many people do live here and how much housing you need for all those people. And you got to figure it out, or we're going to sue you because you're not doing your job.
Yeah.
And so when you think about that, it's so like the state does something that costs a bunch of money and you have to hire a bunch of really smart, like well-positioned planners and like people who have been working in this like system for a long time to think and plan and make a decision that costs money and time. And then you go give it to the people who run stuff in their localities. And then they go, okay, how can we get around this to make the people around us happier? And then they go, okay, well, if we have to do it exactly what the state says, it's going to get us ousted, or we're going to have a lot of like public opinion against us. So we're going to like skirt it a little bit. And then the state comes and checks out what they're doing by like checking their housing plan. They're like, you're not doing this. You need to go back and do it. And they go, no, I think we have. And then the attorney general's office steps in and sues them and says, you must do this, update your housing plan and give it back to us. It's an enforcement perspective from like the legal system.
Why would they not? Are they just like taking the money or something? And
no. So, I mean, that's the whole problem. People in California generally want more housing and want there to be less homelessness. They vote for it all the time. It's the top of public opinion. And then when it gets to their house, they go to their city planners and they're like, no, but I don't want it here. I don't want it in my backyard or in this place. And I don't want you to change the nature of the way downtown looks. Like, it's so cute. Why would I want all high rises down there?
Right.
So they vote for an administration in like the Newsom administration, but it's machine politics. So it's just like the general Democratic administering system that is trying to do what this people of California want, which is to build more housing and make less homelessness.
But then they're shooting themselves in their own foot whenever they go to their own local planning.
Yeah. Then they go to their local planners and they're like, actually, we want a system that will keep us from having to experience the changes that we requested from the top level. And that's all of what I'm describing is expensive and thoughtless and tensing. And it's very complex and silly.
When it's getting us nowhere. Like we're spending all this money to do this stuff and then we're not actually implementing the procedures. So, I mean, we're just going in circles. Yeah.
It's baby steps forward. And it's often 2 steps back.
Well, I think that even in our like federal government, the stuff they do in like the House and the Senate and Congress, it's so crazy too, because they're not simplifying the law. They're creating more and more complex laws that can like help people skirt the system. It's like, no, if you actually just taught people right and wrong, then this would be a way better thing rather than making all these loopholes for people to jump through. And then if you don't have the right education, you don't understand the loopholes.
Yeah. And I mean, like that's a general way of looking at the tax code. And I would agree with that. I think I always think of that term kludgeocracy because it does such a good job of describing like exactly how complex and strange our system is. And it could just be way more straightforward. Just tax people a little bit more and have a little less control over certain things at the local level. But I mean, the system was designed to try and make people feel closer together and less constrained by like the most like the biggest government. But modern democracies have problems that far exceed the capacity to plan for everybody's interests and needs at the most local level. Like it's you know the term economies of scale? So basically there's an idea in economics where like once you reach a certain amount of funding and money, you've hit an economies of scale, and an action or service or system is done better at a certain height of money and influence. So for instance, the common way of looking at this is there's no reason for individual places to do their own utilities. Like it would make no sense for each individual shop on this block, for instance, to run their own generator and clean their own water.
Right.
It's way cheaper and better if you just tax everyone a little bit and have one entity in charge of doing that at a huge scale.
Yeah.
And we saw that problem in Texas. Texas is the only state that completely organizes its own electrical grid, and it failed.
Yeah.
And so that's why electricity, it's for the rest of the United States, it's on one side of the Rockies, and the other side of the Rockies are an organization that runs through all of these states that share power and interest. So utilities is the common example of utilities scale, or economies of scale. And so basically some of the modern problems are best solved at the federal level, where there's an insane amount of money and like at least prospectively a highly professional group of people who can just like plan and make the thing happen. But that's not how it works. Like if the federal government was like, okay, we figured out how to do all the housing stuff in California, and they came there and started enforcing it, like people would just get annoyed. And they'd have less of a place that they couldn't like go to someone and be like, hey, you can't do that. And it's like, sorry, it's out of my control. The feds are handling this. And so, yeah, I mean, the system we live in is complicated and silly and stupid. It's really hard. You'd have to like court public opinion for things that people are already in favor of to keep solving a problem that they don't want.
Yeah. Especially the one you're working on.
Yeah.
Like I think the federal government is extremely corrupt. And when I say this, I think I'm looking at Congress especially, because Congress has, so many millionaires, billionaires in Congress. We don't have a clue what's going on.
Yeah.
They're passing all these 2,000 page long bills that like no one has a clue what's in them. And if you start actually reading through them, you'll see there's all kinds of crazy shit in there that shouldn't be in these things.
Yeah.
And it's because no one's reading them. Like they're just throwing policy in these large bills and then trying to skirt it through. But I'm a huge fan of, I hate when people tell me something to do. So over this whole this pandemic shit, when they might have shut our business down, right?
Yeah.
It tanked. So we had to reopen the business after we had to close that one down.
Yeah.
So that's why we're another bar now instead of the other bar.
Okay.
But I started looking into like the system of government too, because I've never like had any interest in economics or the government at all. Yeah. I'm like, if people just stay the fuck out of my way, I'm just going to keep doing my thing. But whenever they started like coming at me, I was like, okay, now I'm going to see what's going on here. Started looking into Congress, and I was like, well, there's a clear way to fix this problem. Yeah. And I found some experiments on this too, which you might like. It was a mathematician. He took a jar full of jelly beans and he went to this office building. The office building had 5,000 people in it or whatever. So he asked everyone in the office building, how many jelly beans are in this jar? And maybe like one or two got the answer correct. But then he went and averaged all the answers together, and he came within 2 to 3 jelly beans every single time he took the average.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
Really interesting.
So, and he did this multiple times. Like he actually did the experiment over and over again. So it shows that the individual may not know the answer, but the collective, if you get a large enough sample size, does know the answer.
Yeah.
So my thought was that we take the blockchain. Okay.
Okay.
Are you familiar with the blockchain at all?
Yeah, I understand the blockchain.
So we take the blockchain because it's a completely transparent system, and we use smart contracts because there's only certain people that can update smart contracts, the oracles. So we allow them to. Anytime Congress is going up to vote on something, we send it out to the American people. And you just make a little app that goes on your phone that people can just open up, kind of like swipe left or right, just like Bumble. Okay. So they get to look at the bills in their simplified version of the bills so they can actually understand them, layman's terms. They look at the bills, swipe left or right, say yes or no. Okay. Yeah. That accounts for nothing. But what that does, it gives us a a base for the way the constituents want the politicians to vote. So then when the politicians actually go vote, you have a comparison mechanism and you can see which politicians are voting the way their constituents want them to and which aren't. And you also have a report card for each politician that you can see who's actually doing the correct work and who's not.
Yeah. So thinking of things in a new way and trying to organize it better is totally like, it's my bread and butter of what I studied and why I'm interested in it. Because there's a better way to do this.
Everything.
That's what we've been talking about. The problem with like coming up with things like this is that it doesn't always solve the problems that you think it will. For instance, there are voting report cards for people out there, and the people, one of the reasons Congress's bills are so complex and oftentimes they end up like not reading them or something is that staying in office and keeping your job involves like courting public opinion consistently. So the people who work in politicians' office now are mostly comms people. They're not people with advanced political science degrees who are reading through the complex policies of these bills. And oftentimes the policies relate to each other. For instance, like when you're talking about something like single payer healthcare, that would involve actually building more hospitals. So if someone asked you, like based on what you were just describing to me, hey, are you going to vote for this single payer thing? Like there's a bunch of infrastructure money in here. It's like, I thought we were just making more doctors. It's like, no, like the system would need to change at that scale to allow for a single payer healthcare system to exist. And that's just one of many examples. I'm not saying that there isn't bullshit in a bunch of like, this
is so far above my head. I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah. So like there's a concept called pork barreling where you shove a bunch of ham into the middle of a bill. It's been around, and that's a really old term. And so you're not wrong about that.
Yeah.
But the process of administering systems and building new ones is very, very complex, and it interrelates to a lot of things that you wouldn't immediately assume relates to it. And if you ever look into environmental policy, everything is like that. Like I don't know a lot about this, but like getting to a more net carbon zero world would involve changing the way we build concrete and the way everywhere we put it. Like everything is so complex and interrelated, and especially when you look at
what is the reason there?
Systems. I don't remember off the top of my head, but like
the carbons in there, right?
Yeah. So like I'm pretty sure something in concrete and the way you lay it and build it is just like it doesn't absorb sun the way it should or something like that. I don't remember off the top of my head, but that's just a clear example of like how complex this stuff gets. Yeah. So, but the problems with the system we have would still exist in everything you just described. So like, for instance, okay, blockchain. All right. Every American gets to look at a simplified version of the bill. Okay. Who's writing the simplified version of that? And like, how do we pick them? Do we let every American pick them? But that's every single person having like a single opinion about like a couple of people. I don't know.
Well, it's really just a checks and balances system. It's a new system of checks and balances because the vote that the American people do, it's all their opinion. It's public opinion vote. But when you compare it to the politicians' votes, that's where the real thing comes in here, because you're actually seeing the dirty politicians. I think a lot of them are getting paid off.
Well, I think it's really, and not many people like actually get bribed anymore. It's just very simple. You get a promise of more money somewhere else. So, you know, if you leave Congress, you can get a cushy lobbying job, or you get to go to the fanciest parties, or you get to do awesome
do you think lobbying's a problem?
Yeah, it is. I mean, the problem is that the system we've set up requires lobbying because there are really disparate issues that affect a lot of people. But they're like, for instance, like you need people who are representing tribal nations to go lobby Congress to let them know what their problems are that they're facing.
See, that makes sense. Yeah.
But like also lobbying rules allows for like a 100 millionaire who is just job is to think about how to build the best possible connections and get the best possible results for big oil. And that person just lives their life as like a hired hitman for like and so because politics in the highest levels just comes out to communication and I don't know, process planning and, you know, the little trickeries of any like campaign movie that you could think of, like, oh, this person released opposition research at the right time for the other person to lose like 4 points or right before election day, you know? So, I mean, those people are like, they're good at something that doesn't need them to have a political opinion.
Right.
They just need to be good at like making those decisions. And you get people who are like, you would probably talk to them and you'd be like, you are a sociopath. What the hell is wrong with you? But like, they're just doing their job. And I mean, that's the problem with a lot of places and a lot of things. Like you get, I mean, people, what you're saying is correct. People should live more in a collective because this is a very individualistic society and everyone gets angry at each other and it's hard to like communicate and figure out what we all need and want from each other. But like at the end of the day, everyone's just kind of doing their job. Right. Yeah.
Well, that's the problem. Most people don't have a big picture view.
Yeah.
They're only just like living in their world. It's like, no, when you actually expand out and see that the entire car, I use a car analogy is what I use. So like even with the politicians, like everyone's like, burn the system down, start over, or just throw all the politicians away and hire new ones. It's like, you can't do that. Like think about it like it's a car. Okay. In a car, you don't just throw it out and buy a new one when you break something.
Yeah.
No, you have systems that monitor the car. And whenever a part breaks, you replace the part.
Yeah.
So it's the same thing this system do. Just monitor the system, the car that is our complex system. And we replace parts as you need to.
I think I think there's a few interesting things we could do. So for what my big fixes for the system we have right now is immediately end the sinecure for the Supreme Court. And
can you explain that more?
The sinecure is the term that refers to a lifetime appointment. So just get rid of the lifetime appointment, make it, I don't know, 10 years, 15 years at most.
I'm down with that.
Yeah. That would be an immediate way to guarantee a faster cycle. And then like, I don't know, like Supreme Court is something that like people lobby on and describe like how politicians get away with being like, hey, you gotta get me that, big thing is up. But if, the best legal minds in the country only get like, what, I don't know, like a presidential appointment, 4 years to forever alter the policy of America without any political consequences. Maybe get only a couple of years. We also some states have elections for their Supreme Court. So
that should be all politicians, right?
Yeah. I mean, like the austere nature of the court being some non-political element. It's ridiculous because everything is political and all of those people have a political opinion and they're going to find the legal mechanism that allows them to push it. It's just like, it's the idea that somehow these people are somehow above the concept of politics in their decision-making process is saying that like they enter like a zero space above human consciousness when they're going to make a choice. Like what, you think these people that haven't spent their entire life having an opinion just lose it the moment they enter their robe?
Right.
It's silly. Get rid of the Senate. Senate's the most disgustingly evil thing ever invented.
What would you do though?
Make the House. That's how every other modern democracy does it. There's one major house. I mean, like for instance, Britain has the House of Commons, which does most of its decision making, and then the House of Lords, which used to have much more power when it was first created prior, like within the Magna Carta, and now it's pretty much ceremonial power. The fact that the upper house is essentially like the House of Lords in America is ridiculous. 6-year appointments for people that like can be there forever, and there's 2 of them from every state. So like, for instance, I mean, there are more people in Los Angeles County than there are in individually like 30 other states. Like why do 2 people from Montana get the same power as California, where 1 in 9 Americans is Californian?
Right.
You just like the House in and of itself is not that excellent of a system, but like it's parliamentary.
Makes more sense.
Yeah, it just makes more sense, and it's not as
Well, it seems like they lock up policy too. When you have these two competing things, the House and the Senate, they're literally just locking up policy.
Yeah, I mean the way California does it. I mean the House should be the upper house first of all, but you could just get rid of the Senate. Screw that. The reason we have the Senate is because of the New Jersey Compromise, I believe it was, when they're writing. Basically, when they were writing the Constitution, all the slave owning states were like, we're not going to have any power if you make the upper house based on a proportional representation. And they're like, you will make the upper house the one where it's just 2 people from each state. And so places with much less citizenry, obviously there are people there being tortured to death every day. But that like they weren't citizens and they didn't vote. So Yeah, by making the system run most efficiently. The highest level of legislation is in the Senate. They get to make the biggest decisions. All the budget, some of the biggest budgetary stuff goes through there. And it's ridiculous. It's super, I can't think of the term, but like it just reduces the representation of the actual number of human beings in America by just making it a 2 from each state, as opposed to looking to the lower house, which should be the upper house, the House of Representatives, being the upper house where a proportional representation of the United States actually exists.
No, that makes total sense. I never even thought about it that way, to be honest with you. Yeah. So yeah, I agree with that.
Every other democracy runs off a parliamentary system. Like we're alone in modern democracies of not having a universal healthcare system of some kind and not having proportional representation for the upper level of house. That being said, that does not immediately solve everything. If you look at French politics, Macron is like the most centrist and like very in favor of big oil type of person that can be. And, he almost always loses to Le Pen, who is a right wing, like a quasi fascist. Mm-hmm. He's almost lost to Le Pen like 3 elections in a row. So, the solutions to the world aren't solved exactly by fixing the system. But
it's a step in the right direction.
Yeah. Hell yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that about all problems. My theory with the way the world is a duality is like, if there's a problem, there has to be a solution.
Yeah.
We just haven't, the right person who has the solution may be sleeping on the street.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this is the X factor of solving homelessness too. And like solving poverty is that like, if you deprive, like, people call this the land of opportunity, but like it's mostly you get the opportunity to do stuff if, you come from money.
Yeah.
And, I come from a middle class background and, my parents have helped me a lot. That's why I get to work on cool stuff and meet you at a bar and get to talk about on a podcast. Yeah. But like there are a lot of people who have a lot of powerful minds and powerful work ethics that just didn't get the same opportunities as I did simply by nature of economics.
Yeah. And a few mistakes and you're on the street.
Yeah. To everyone, like I always say this, like every person is 2 or 3 really bad days away from being homeless.
Yeah.
Because that's the system we live in.
It's a sad one, man. I look forward to following your work.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I work in the state of California doing some really interesting, exciting stuff. I won't talk too much about that because I work as, a policy and research analyst for underneath the direction of the people who get to be political. So none of my opinions today are explicitly the opinions of the people I work under. But I also am in grad school still, and I'm working on a final paper, and I'm hoping to be published at the end of this year.
Dude, you have a fascinating mind, and I think you're going in the correct direction.
I really appreciate it. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, no, whenever you come back in town, let me know. We'll do this again.
Yeah, I'd love to.
Yeah, thank you, brother.
Right, thank you.